Have you ever felt like you've lost an argument before you even got a chance to speak? Well, that's probably because the most powerful persuasion doesn't actually happen during the debate. It happens way before. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden techniques used to build reality itself, to construct the very stage where our thoughts perform.
So let me just ask you, straight up, when you get into a discussion, are you in a real, genuine exchange of ideas? Or are you, maybe without even realizing it, just playing a role in a show that was designed and lit long before you ever walked on stage? That's the big question we're digging into.
And that brings us to this idea of the architect of persuasion. See, this isn't about someone who just has a better argument. No, this is someone who builds the entire framework, the foundation, the walls, the whole worldview, so that their conclusion feels like the only logical one. Let's get into how they do it.
All right, so how does an architect even begin? Well, first things first, you've got to lay the foundation. These are the tools used to create a baseline reality, a kind of concrete slab of truth that everything else is going to be built on top of. The first, and maybe the most powerful tool in the shed, is the big lie. Its power comes from its sheer size. It's a lie so massive, so completely shameless, that it just bypasses our normal BS detectors. We just think, come on, nobody would have the nerve to just make that up, and in that split second of doubt, the lie starts to set like concrete. And this right here is the core strategy. Once that huge, foundational lie is accepted, it becomes the new ground zero. Every single argument that comes after it might be perfectly logical on its own, but it's all happening inside a completely fake reality. It is a seriously powerful, world-bending technique.
Okay, here's another foundational tool, but this one is way more subtle. It's the unstated assumption. This thing is a trap. It's a premise that's never actually said out loud, but just to even get into the conversation, you have to accept it. It's kind of like a hidden cover charge to enter the debate.
This classic example just illustrates the trap perfectly. I mean, how do you even answer this question? If you give a date, you're admitting you did it. If you say, I never did, you sound defensive and like you're dodging the question. The question itself is the trap, right? It's built on that unstated assumption that you're guilty. The only way to win is to refuse to step on that stage in the first place.
So let's move on to the next phase. Once that foundation is laid, the architect starts drawing the blueprints. And these techniques aren't about facts, not really. They're about controlling the map of the conversation, deciding which rooms we all get to go into and which doors stay locked. The first tool for the blueprint is agenda setting. This is incredibly sneaky. It's not about telling you what to think about an issue. It's about controlling what you think about to begin with. The real power here is in what gets kept off the agenda completely.
This iconic quote just sums it all up, doesn't it? By constantly putting the spotlight on just a few specific topics, everything else is left in total darkness. So our reality gets defined not just by what we're shown, but by what is systematically kept out of view.
I mean, just take a look at this chart of a hypothetical news cycle. The huge focus on the economy and crime makes them feel like they're the only problems that really matter. Meanwhile, an issue like the environment, sitting there at just 3%, well, it's made to feel kind of trivial, or at least not urgent. This isn't a reflection of reality. It's a reflection of the agenda.
Okay, so once a topic actually makes it onto the agenda, the architect has to frame it. Think of it like a window. The information is the landscape outside, but the frame? The frame determines exactly what piece of that landscape you see and from what angle you see it. Look at this. This is a perfect illustration. It is the exact same product. But just notice the feeling you get. 85% lean sounds healthy, right? Desirable. But 15% fat sounds unhealthy and negative. The fact didn't change at all, but your emotional reaction was completely guided by the frame.
So the foundation is set, the blueprints are drawn, now the architect gets to choose the actual building materials. And in persuasion, the materials are words. The specific language they use is what gives the whole structure its texture and its emotional punch.
Loaded language is all about pre-programming a response. These are words that don't just describe a thing, they come with a feeling already attached. They're designed to totally bypass your logical brain and go straight for an emotional gut reaction.
Check out this example. Public servant. Makes you think of duty, community, service. Feels good. Now bureaucrat. Ugh. You can almost feel the red tape and the frustration. The person and the job are exactly the same, but one word has already told you if you should admire them or resent them.
So if loaded language is designed to trigger an emotion, euphemisms are designed to numb it.
They're the architect's way of hiding the ugly, uncomfortable parts of their building. They wrap a harsh reality in soft, vague language to make it go down easier.
This is a really stark and powerful example. Just notice how enhanced interrogation sounds almost clinical, professional. Torture, on the other hand, is brutal, ugly, and morally charged. The euphemism is designed to take something totally unacceptable and turn it into something we can debate calmly from a distance.
Now for a really sophisticated tool, and this one is tough to spot, paltering. This isn't actually lying. In fact, the power of paltering is that it only uses true statements. It's the art of building a lie out of carefully chosen truths. So this slide basically gives you the playbook. You select a few facts that are 100% true, you arrange them in a very specific order. But, and here's the key, you strategically leave out that one critical piece of context that changes the meaning of everything. You don't tell the lie, you create the perfect conditions for the listener to build the lie for you in their own mind. It's kind of brilliant and really deceptive.
So we've walked through the tools for laying the foundation, drawing the blueprints, and picking the materials. But the point of all this isn't to make you cynical. It's to empower you, to let you see the scaffolding, that hidden structure behind all the narratives you run into every single day.
So let's just quickly recap the architect's toolkit. We saw how the big lie creates a totally false foundation, how unstated assumptions lay a trap, how agenda setting controls what you even see, and how framing controls how you see it. Then you've got loaded language to program your feelings and paltering to build a lie out of truths. These are the tools. Because once you can spot these techniques, the spell is broken. You're no longer just an actor performing on a stage someone else built. You can see the design. You can see the architecture. And so the question becomes, now that you can see it, what are you going to build?
You ever get that feeling like your emotions have been completely hijacked? Well, today, we're going to crack open the manipulator's playbook. We're going to show you exactly how they do it.
You know the feeling, right? It's that instant gut punch of anger, or maybe excitement you get from a headline. It hits you way before your brain has even had a chance to ask, wait a minute, is this even true?
Yeah, that feeling, that's not an accident. It is absolutely by design. It's a carefully crafted hook, made specifically to grab onto your emotions and just completely sidestep your rational mind.
So there's actually a name for this hidden battle for your mind. It's called the Seducer's game. And honestly, it's a perfect name for it, because it's literally a fight for who's in control of your decisions. A fight that's happening between two very different parts of your own brain. Okay, so on one team, you've got your logical brain, the prefrontal cortex. Think of it as the slow, careful analyst. It takes its time, requires effort, and it's always asking, is this actually true? But on the other team, you've got your emotional brain, the amygdala. And this thing is fast. It's automatic, it's reactive, and it's not asking about truth. It's screaming, am I safe? The whole goal of a manipulator is to just blow right past that slow, logical guard and speak directly to the fast, primal alarm system.
So how do they start? What's the first move in this game? Well, it's not random. They don't just, throw emotional spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. No. It's much more surgical than that. They pick a very specific vulnerability by targeting the most powerful, the most primal drives that every single one of us has.
And here they are, the 4 main backdoors into our decision-making. Manipulators know these inside and out. They go after our fear, our desire, our deep, deep need to belong to the group, and, of course, our pride. If they can get a handle on just one of these, they're in. And this right here, this is the core idea of the whole thing. This isn't about winning a debate with facts and figures. It's a straight-up biological hack. The goal is to trigger such an emotional flood that your logical brain just shuts down. Because once that emotional amygdala is in the driver's seat, your reason and logic, they're tied up and locked in the trunk.
Okay, so we get the why now. Let's get into the how. It's time to open up the Seducer's toolkit and look at the actual weapons they use to hijack these primal drives. And first up, the big one. The oldest, most reliable weapon in the entire arsenal, fear. It is the ultimate motivator, right? It's hardwired directly into our survival instincts. When we get scared, we just stop thinking and start reacting. It's that simple. This is the classic appeal to fear. And man, it's a classic for a reason. Just paint a terrifying picture, doesn't even matter if it's real or imagined, and all of a sudden we're desperate for someone, anyone, to make us feel safe.
And when we're that desperate, we are willing to trade just about anything, our freedom, our money, even our own better judgment, all for a simple promise of security. But fear isn't always about causing a huge panic. Sometimes it's more subtle. There's a tactic called FUD. It stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And the goal here isn't to make you run away screaming. It's to make you freeze in place. By just flooding you with all this negative, confusing, dubious information, they paralyze you. You don't know what to do. And an opponent who's frozen by doubt, well, they can't fight back, can they?
Okay, so it's not just about the fear of, physical danger. Manipulators also go after another incredibly deep-seated fear, the fear of being alone. Our need to be part of a tribe, to belong, that is one of our most powerful and therefore most exploitable vulnerabilities. And I'm sure you've seen this one everywhere. It's the join the crowd or bandwagon effect. The message is so simple. Hey, everyone else is doing it, so why aren't you? This has nothing to do with logic. It's a direct shot at that ancient primal fear of being cast out of the tribe. We're just wired to find safety in numbers, even if that means going along with something we're not totally sure about. Then there's flag waving. This one takes that need to belong and just cranks the dial up to 11. It works by wrapping an idea or an agenda in the flag, linking it directly to patriotism. And once that happens, well, questioning the idea is no longer just a simple disagreement. Oh no, now it's framed as being unpatriotic, as an act of betrayal against your whole country. Of course, for any of this to work, you have to trust the person saying it, right? And that trust, it is very, very often manufactured. And they do it using two really different, in fact, almost opposite strategies. Just look at this contrast. It's fascinating. On one hand, you have the plain folk approach. This is the, hey, I'm just a regular person, just like you routine. It's all about faking humility to get you to lower your guard, to make you feel understood. But then you've got the total opposite, the cult of personality. This isn't about being relatable at all. It's about being a larger than life, a hero, this almost godlike figure who has all the answers and makes you feel protected. See? Two completely different paths to the exact same destination, getting you to trust them without question. All right, the last tool in the kit we're going to look at today. This one is so deceptive, mainly because it sounds so good. It uses all this inspiring, positive language to hide the fact that a lot of the time there's absolutely nothing of substance underneath. It's a technique called glittering generalities, and it's all about using these emotionally appealing virtue words that everybody loves. Words like freedom, hope, change, justice. They give you a warm, fuzzy feeling, right? They signal that this person is on the right side. But the key is they are kept deliberately vague. So you feel good about the word, but you never stop to ask the hard questions. Like, okay, but what does freedom actually look like in your plan? What are the specifics? Okay, so each of these tools is pretty powerful on its own, but here's the thing. In the real world, they're almost never used one at a time. They get chained together to build this incredibly powerful emotional story, a hook that is really, really hard to wriggle out of. So let's walk through a classic combo. Step 1. You create a villain. You demonize an enemy to kickstart that fear response. Step 2. You offer a solution, but you keep it super vague, using those glittering generalities we just talked about. Step 3. You imply that everybody already agrees with this plan. That's the bandwagon effect kicking in. And finally, Step 4. You wrap the entire thing in the flag, using patriotism to shut down any criticism. By the time they're done, you're left with this emotionally airtight narrative that your logical brain can't even get a foothold in. Okay, so that's the playbook. Knowing about it is one thing. But what do you do about it? How do you actually defend yourself? How do you break the spell when you feel it being cast on you? Look, if there is just one thing you remember from all this, make it this. Awareness is your best defense. It's like a shield. The second you can put a name to the technique that's being used on you, the moment you can say, that's an appeal to fear, or that's a glittering generality, it loses almost all of its power. It's pretty hard to fall for a magic trick when you can see exactly how the magician is doing it. So, here's a simple 4-step defense plan for the next time you feel that emotional gut punch. First, just pause. Seriously, create a little bit of space between the feeling and your reaction. Second, name the emotion. Just identify it. Am I feeling scared right now? Am I angry? Is this my pride talking? Third, ask yourself, what does this message actually want me to do? And fourth, and this is the big one, who benefits from me having this strong emotional reaction right now? And believe me, this isn't just some abstract theory. This playbook is running 24/7. You'll see it in advertisements, you'll hear it in political speeches. It's all over your social media feed. So, I'll leave you with this question. Now that you know the playbook, now that you can recognize the tools, where are you going to see it next?
Darker side of persuasion. We're not just talking about arguments here. We're talking about these subtle, really frustrating tricks that are designed not to convince you, but to completely mess with your sense of logic. Let's break down how it all works. You know that feeling, right? You're in a discussion, or maybe even a debate, and suddenly you feel like you're sinking in quicksand. The more you struggle to find some solid ground, the more lost you get. Well, it turns out that feeling is rarely an accident. It's actually a strategy. And that strategy has a name: corrupting logic. The entire goal is to hijack the little shortcuts our brains take every day. It's designed to jam our ability to think clearly, making it almost impossible to tell the difference between what's real and what's just, well, noise. Okay, so to really get the tricks, we first have to understand the trickster. This brings us to the archetype behind this whole strategy. We'll call them the confuser. Their goal is super simple: create as much confusion as humanly possible. Now, this is absolutely crucial. The confuser doesn't actually care if you believe them. Not really. They win the second your brain gets so tired from trying to process all the garbage that you just give up. They're not aiming for your agreement, they're aiming for your exhaustion.
So how do they actually do it? Well, one of the most common ways is to just turn on the taps and flood you with information. They literally use sheer volume as a weapon against your logic.
First up in the arsenal is something called the fire hose of falsehood. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Think of a high-pressure hose just spraying out lies so fast and in such huge amounts that you couldn't possibly fact-check or even just process a single one. It's a technique designed to make the whole idea of truth feel, well, exhausting and just completely out of reach. Now, this gets confused a lot with a similar trick called the Gish Gallup, but there's a really important difference. The fire hose is for big audiences, propaganda style. The Gish Gallup, on the other hand, is a debate tactic. It's used to drown one single opponent in so many weak or misleading arguments that there's just no time to respond to them all. So one's a weapon of mass confusion, the other is a tool for a one-on-one takedown. But it's not always about just overwhelming you with volume. Sometimes the most powerful confusion comes from tricks that wrap themselves in this veneer of truth. They use little pieces of reality to build a much bigger lie. So imagine you're reading an article about some big new project, and you see this quote from the CEO. It sounds pretty damning, doesn't it? A total failure, coming straight from the source. But wait a second. And there's the full sentence. We see the whole trick laid bare, quoting out of context. Just by snipping out a few key words, the entire meaning gets flipped on its head. A statement about success suddenly looks like an admission of failure. It's a classic for a reason. A close cousin to that is the half-truth. This one is especially sneaky, because every single word of it can be factually correct. The lie isn't in what they say, it's in the crucial information they don't say. It guides you to a false conclusion, all on your own, which makes the lie feel like your own brilliant idea. And of course, we have to talk about the misuse of statistics. I mean, look at this chart. At a quick glance, it looks like product A is just crushing product B. But if you look closer at that vertical axis, the whole scale of the chart might only show a tiny, completely insignificant 1% difference. This gives a false conclusion the authority of math. It makes a lie look like hard data. All right, now for the most insidious tactics of them all. These are the ones that don't just feed you bad information, they actually weaponize your own mind. They turn your brain against you. Let's talk about weaponized cognitive dissonance. See, our brains absolutely hate holding two contradictory ideas at the same time. It creates this intense mental stress. The manipulator knows this, so first, they intentionally create that conflict. Then, they let that psychological tension build up. And finally, they offer their idea, their product, as the one simple escape to make it all go away. It's a manufactured problem with a pre-packaged solution. And after we've fallen for it, our own minds help to seal the deal through something called rationalization. This is where we literally invent a perfectly logical-sounding reason for a decision that was actually based on emotion or, being manipulated. It's our brain's way of making us feel smart about being fooled, which makes us a willing partner in our own deception. So if these tricks are so powerful, what do we do? How do we defend ourselves? The key isn't to fight every single point. In fact, that's exactly what the confuser wants you to do. The real antidote is just awareness of the strategy itself.
When you kind of zoom out, you start to see the patterns, right? The confuser always picks quantity over quality. They'll strip away context, they'll lean on our mental shortcuts, and they'll always try to swap out facts for feelings. Once you see these patterns, you can spot the game without getting lost in all the messy details.
And that really brings us to the most important thing to remember. The moment you realize you're being hit with a fire hose of falsehoods or a Gish Gallup, you've already won. The power isn't in trying to win their argument, it's in recognizing that you're being pulled into a rigged game you were never meant to win in the first place.
Because really, you can't win a game that's rigged from the start. The only winning move is not to play. So the question I'll leave you with is this. Now that you can spot the strategy, what games will you choose to just walk away from?
Have you ever found yourself in a discussion that just flips? One minute it's a disagreement, and the next it's a full-on war between us and them. Well, you know what? That's usually not an accident. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a set of powerful persuasion techniques, a playbook, really, that's designed specifically to divide and control. And it all starts by hijacking a really basic part of who we are.
It all boils down to this one question. Why does that us versus them feeling feel so primal, so compelling? I mean, it's almost an instinct, right? Well, understanding that feeling is the absolute key to seeing how it gets used against us. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're breaking down the whole playbook. First up, we'll look at the psychological weak spot they target, what we're calling the tribal switch. Then we'll get into their three main plays, how they create an enemy, how they isolate and attack that enemy, and then how they defend their own side. And stick around, because at the end, we'll cover the single best countermove you have, awareness.
Okay, so before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the attacks, we have to understand the core vulnerability they're designed to exploit. It's this little thing in our heads, the tribal switch.
See, at our core, we're all wired for tribalism. It's this ancient, deep-seated instinct to form loyal in-groups. You know, our team, our people, our community. And as a result, we tend to view out-groups with a bit of suspicion. Now, this isn't good or bad, it's part of our human software. It's been with us forever.
And this is the whole point. That instinct, that little switch, can be deliberately flipped. It can be weaponized. An aggressor doesn't have to invent this feeling in us. They just have to find it and exploit it to turn us against each other.
So, how do they do it? How do they weaponize that tribal instinct? Well, the very first step in the playbook is to give your in-group a very clear target. Play number 1 is all about creating an enemy.
The most direct and honestly brutal way to do this is through demonization. We're not just talking about disagreeing with someone's ideas here. No, this is a tactic meant to strip opponents of their humanity. They get painted as evil, as less than human, as a threat to your very existence. And why? Think about it. It's a lot easier to justify hurting a monster than it is to hurt another person.
Now, a more subtle version of this is labeling. You've seen this. Words like extremist, traitor, elitist. These are basically mental shortcuts. They're designed to make you bypass critical thinking entirely. They tell you exactly what to think about someone before you even hear them out, shutting down the conversation before it even begins.
And then you've got the classic scapegoating. Okay, so when things are going badly, the economy's a mess, society feels unstable, there's all this anger and frustration just floating around. Scapegoating takes all of that anger and channels it like a lightning rod onto one single, usually vulnerable target. It's an incredibly powerful way to shift blame away from where it might actually belong.
Okay, so the enemy has been created, they've been demonized. What's next? Now the aggressor moves to systematically tear down their credibility and support system. And that brings us to the second play in the book, isolate and attack.
The most direct assault here is the smear campaign. This is a deliberate, coordinated attack to absolutely ruin someone's reputation. The goal isn't to win an argument, it's to make the target so toxic that nobody will listen to them, nobody will stand with them. It is pure and simple character assassination.
Next up is a tactic that's kind of sneaky because it doesn't require any real evidence of wrongdoing, guilt by association. It works by tainting a target. You just link them to some person or group that's already been demonized, and all those negative feelings just transfer right over. It's a way to discredit someone without ever having to actually deal with what they're saying.
And finally, there's a tactic called flack. Imagine this. You decide to speak out against something, and suddenly you're hit with this overwhelming tidal wave of hate.
harassment, threats, criticism from every angle. That's flak. It's designed to make the personal cost of speaking out so high that you just give up, leaving you totally isolated.
So, the enemy has been created and isolated. The final set of plays isn't so much about attacking outwards as it is about maintaining control over the aggressor's own side. This is play number 3, Defend the Ingroup.
A classic strategy here, one of the oldest tricks in the book, is divide and rule. By deliberately stirring up conflict and breaking bigger populations into smaller, squabbling factions, an aggressor makes sure that no one can ever unite to challenge them. It's a preemptive strike against solidarity.
And this brings us to a defensive move you have definitely seen probably 1,000 times. Whataboutism. Instead of actually addressing a criticism, the aggressor just deflects it by pointing a finger right back at the accuser. Oh yeah? Well, what about that time you did this? The goal is obvious. It's not to have a real debate. It's to change the subject and completely dodge accountability.
So, we've seen the playbook. We've seen how it's used to divide us, to control us. It's all pretty bleak. So, what can we do? What's the difference? Well, the single most powerful countermove is actually really simple. It's awareness.
Your defense strategy is basically a mental checklist. First, you have to learn to identify the language. When you hear that demonizing talk or those reductive labels, you gotta call it what it is. Second, always question the motive. Ask yourself, who benefits from me hating or fearing this other group? And finally, and this is the big one, you have to consciously reject the division. Just refuse to get sucked into that simplistic us versus them trap. Because once you really understand these tactics, once you see the blueprint of the attack, it becomes a whole lot harder to fall for them. It starts to look obvious. So the real question we want to leave you with is this. Now that you see the playbook, can you ever really unsee it?
All right, welcome back. Today, we're diving into something that goes way beyond just simple persuasion or clever ads. We are looking at the actual architecture of control, the final, most intense stage of shaping how people behave. We're talking about how you can engineer, literally build, complete compliance.
So let's just jump right in with a pretty serious question. How do you go beyond just convincing someone and actually engineer their total compliance? I mean, how do you make sure they don't just agree with you, but that they act exactly the way you want them to?
Well, the answer is kinda chilling. You stop trying to persuade them at all. See, at this level, it's not about winning an argument. It's about constructing a reality, a whole world that's so complete and so all-encompassing that it literally works like a cage for the mind.
Now, the source material we're drawing from breaks all this down into 5 categories, which are basically an escalating ladder of control. It starts with structuring reality, then it moves up to hijacking emotion, corrupting logic, and weaponizing tribalism. But today, we're going all the way to the top. We're focusing on that final step, the absolute endgame. Category 5, engineering compliance. This is it. This is where all the other techniques come together and lead to one final destination, a stage that's known simply as the cage. It's where the whole game shifts from trying to influence what people think to just flat out dictating how they act. And here is the absolute key difference you've got to understand. Most of the time, we think about persuasion as changing what someone believes, right? Getting inside their head and changing their opinion. But the cage, that's all about conditioning. It's a system that's designed to train your behavior directly, sometimes without even touching your beliefs. It cares about what you do, not what you think. And the archetype for this category has the perfect name, the jailer. A jailer isn't interested in having a debate with you. Their only goal is to structure your environment so completely that the very idea of resisting doesn't even pop into your head. They're not a debater. They're a trainer, a controller, building the walls of that cage one brick at a time. So, how does a jailer actually do it? Well, they've got a powerful and a very specific set of tools. Each one is designed to control behavior and really to dismantle a person's sense of self. Let's take a look at the core techniques in the toolkit. The absolute foundation of the cage is something called milieu control. It sounds fancy, but it just means total control over the environment. What you see, what you hear, who you're allowed to talk to. It's all managed. By creating this kind of information monopoly, the jailer makes sure that their reality is the only reality you ever get to experience. It's basically strategic isolation. Next up is a big one, and you've probably heard of it: gaslighting. This is a direct attack on your mind. It's constantly denying what you know is true, saying things like, "You're just imagining things," or "That never happened." The goal is to make you completely lose faith in your own perception, your own memory. And if you can't trust yourself, well, who are you going to trust? The jailer? See how that works?
Then you've got good old operant conditioning. I mean, this is training in its purest form. If you do something that's desired, you get rewarded, maybe with praise or social status or other perks. If you do something that's not desired, you get punished, maybe with shame or being isolated. Over time, this just systematically shapes your behavior. Compliance starts to feel good, and dissent starts to feel really, really painful.
And listen, the list just goes on and on. The toolkit is packed. Beyond these main ones, you've got things like repetition, just saying something over and over until it feels true. You've got the foot in the door technique, where you get someone to agree to something small to open them up for bigger demands later, and something called pensée unique, which is just enforcing one single mandatory way of thinking. Every single tool is just another bar in the cage. Okay, so we've seen the how, all of these tools in the toolkit, but why? What's the end game here? What is the ultimate goal of building this whole elaborate cage? The answer? Well, it reveals the true purpose of the entire system. You've got to understand, these techniques aren't just a random collection of dirty tricks. They are a system. And when they're all used together, they have one single and honestly chilling purpose: to systematically dismantle a person's individuality, their ability to think critically, and at the end of the day, their will to resist. And this brings us right to the intended result of all this: demoralization. Think about it. When your entire world is controlled, when your own reality is constantly questioned, and when your every action is conditioned, the natural outcome is that you just lose hope. You get to a state where you don't even believe in your own values anymore, or your own strength, or even the possibility that things could be different. Because that is the final objective. The cage isn't built to make people who are just faking it, who are pretending to comply. As the source material puts it, the goal is to create people who have genuinely lost the internal capacity to even imagine fighting back. It's about breaking the will itself. I know, this is some really heavy stuff. But the reason we're going through this isn't to leave you feeling hopeless. It is the exact opposite. The whole point is to give you a framework, a way to recognize this stuff, because that's where all the power is. So here's the big takeaway, the most important thing to remember from all this. You cannot defend yourself against a weapon you don't even know exists. Just by understanding the tools of the jailer, by seeing how milieu control and gaslighting and conditioning actually work, you start to build up an immunity. Awareness is the first and the most critical step to keeping your own mind free. And that brings us to one last thought. Now that you have the blueprint, now that you know what these tools look like and how they're used, take a look around. Can you see the bars of the cage? Maybe some that are being built right now, or maybe some that have been there all along.